with the portable mics for the speakers, maybe if we could turn up the house lights and turn down the spots when you get a chance. There were a couple of questions, and I'll take them, and then I want to roll in as well, especially that David asked about media to these speakers also. Martin, stand up and use your best court voice.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier on, the real power in the US system is in the House and in the Senate and in the gubernatorial election. What's the panel's view on how they're going to pan out? Because ultimately, even if there is a Trump presidency, it's going to be hamstrung by what happens in both the Senate and in the House.
Okay, I'll take another one. Malcolm, in your best council chamber voice.
First of all, I would like to compliment you on the summer school team, because I actually think that's been an excellent panel. To that change in political divide, the Americanism versus globalism, and this point about the views of experts. And people will be aware that during the course of the Brexit debate, Michael Gove, the British minister, famously said, "We've had enough of experts." And is there this danger, and it ties into the digital media point. I actually think we mentioned socialism, so why not mention the great socialist Karl Marx? I think Marx was right. Marx famously said that the revolution will come when the tools of production are in the hands of the proletariat. And with new media such as Twitter, you know, the tools of production are in the hands of the proletariat. Facts don't matter anymore. If you have an opinion, if you have a feeling, and Newt Gingrich has kind of expressed that, we can see it in the Netherlands with their builders. Now the facts don't matter anymore. So how do we, as the political establishment, kind of connect with those who feel that they are alienated? And one just brief comment on Larry Donnelly and his ties to this. Larry Donnelly, I noticed in his bio, described himself, and reinforced my point, as a political commentator on the journal of A. The problem is in the new world, everybody is a political commentator.
Okay, let's roll some of those together. We'll start with Tad and work down. First is question about we're in a post-fact era, and David's point that the media have sat out this. I mean, you can be impartial, and you can, this part of the world, media legally have to not be biased. But there's no bias in the facts. Is that true or false? There's no neutrality about the facts. Has that been an issue this campaign?
Well, I believe the media is just now trying to figure out how to cover politics in America in the age of social media. Okay, I think things are fun. The ground is shifting underneath everyone, and no one, I think, in the media, I think the entire media hasn't quite figured it out yet. I think piece by piece they are figuring it out. I think the Dallas Morning News figured it out. Okay, and they decided they had a responsibility to stand up, to speak out, and they did so boldly. You know, the other media, you know, the media in America, I believe most of them, they want to be fair and even-handed. And there's a lot of really good journalists around the country who believe in that. When I worked so much outside the United States, when I started going to Latin America and arriving there and trying to figure out how to do campaigns there, and people I would work with would say, okay, well, that's our newspaper, and that's our radio station, that's our television station, so we're going to go and talk to them. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. You've got your own, you know, what's happening in America now is you have, I think, a lot of very good, responsible, fair journalists who live in a media culture which is getting more like Latin America than the United States of America. Okay, they're beginning to criticize. Fox News led the way on this. Other cable outlets are also, you know, MSNBC is much more to the left. Fox News is moving to the right. So our media culture is changing, and in the midst of that, there's this whole new way for candidates and campaigns to bypass the media culture. Okay, so the rules, I think, they're trying to figure out on the fly. I don't know if they're going to figure them out by election day, okay, in 2016. But I do think that the aftermath of this election, depending on the result, will reshape the media environment in America. And the media environment right now is being driven, for the most part, by revenue, which there is a lot of, particularly on the television side, and, you know, by the ability to move the course of events by the way that you cover things. Normally, a candidate like Trump, who's been getting very tough coverage, for example, from the New York Times, would not have survived that coverage. But Trump is able to bypass that coverage and talk directly to voters, principally through social media. So we'll see what happens in this election. The outcome, I think, will determine whether that media changes.
Okay, Larry?
Yeah, I have kind of maybe a slightly cynical or even a flippant take on the media issue, and that is the media wouldn't continue. Remember, this campaign goes on forever. American campaigns go on forever. The media wouldn't be giving the Trump as much coverage as he gets if people weren't reading, clicking, watching, etc. Trump fascinates people. They go to these stories because they want to read them. You mentioned the journal.ie. In terms of the columns I've written on American politics, there's almost double the people read the columns that have Trump in the title versus the ones that don't. So to some extent, the media is only a reflection of what we're seeing, of what's there and what's in the public. So yeah, there's certainly an issue there about media coverage of politics, and I think, again, Tad makes the case very well that social media kind of effectively bypasses in some of the old organs, both at national and local level. For instance, Kevin's paper, the Boston Globe, it doesn't have the same impact that it once did. But the landscape is transformed. So the bottom line is, if the media is only, I think, to some extent, a reflection of what's out there.
Okay. But I mean, if Donald Trump can send a message directly to 11.9 million people, and nobody is mediating it, saying that's true, that's not true, that's nonsense, that's not factual, is that part of the problem?
Well, what I would say is that certainly a platform like Twitter allows Trump, but also Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, all of Trump's opponents, but in the same way that view, if they're at all critical of them. And so
Bring the microphone here, but before we take the question, Tad and Larry, maybe Martin's question about the Congress, the House and the Senate. I mean, Stacey showed us the hold the Republican Party has. In what House is that on the governorship?
Well, listen, first of all, we have to draw a line between the House races and I think the Senate and the gubernatorial races. Okay, then you get the presidential campaign. The House races, in large measure, are dictated by the districts that have been designed by Republican control of governors and state legislatures. And they have gerrymandered, that's the term we use, these districts, and have given them tremendous advantage. And so, unless there is a tidal wave of an election, and the electorate that turns out is so heavily Democrat, 8, 9 points plus Democrat, the Republicans are in a very good position because of that tactical advantage to hold on to at least the majority of the House. Not as big as they have right now, but to still hold on to the House. The Senate races, the gubernatorial races, they're different. They're like the presidential, the statewide races. So if if Hillary wins by any measure, a few points even, there's a very good chance the Democrats are going to take back the Senate. The governor's races will go up and down depending on the nature of the state. You know, if you got a Republican governor, Charlie Baker, if he were running for re-election, would re-elect in Massachusetts. Very little state because, you know, he's in sync with the voters there. So it will depend on the individual. So we'll have to wait and see. The only way the Democrats take the House and the Senate and the presidency is, I think, a massive tidal wave election. So right now, I think, you know, they'll probably hold on to the House. I think we're going to get the Senate just because there's so many Republicans up, and it's likely to be, you know, better elected for Democrats in general, and we'll have divided government, but, you know, we'll see how divided it is when it's over.
Unless you disagree with that, Larry, we'll take the next question.
Just a very quick postscript question, really, for Kevin. If the media have given a lot of coverage to both candidates, but I sense sometimes that because she's the more responsible candidate, she gets more forensic an analysis of every single thing she does, Hillary Clinton, whereas Trump is more like the Michael O'Leary style of campaigning. It's just oxygen he's going for. How come no journalist has found his tax returns?
Why no journalist has spot? We can't get it. It's up to him to release his tax returns. But that is a campaign issue. I mean, there's obviously a belief that he's hiding something or he released them. But I mean, I think your point is true about, I think Mrs. Clinton is held to a higher standard because, but it's hard to, there's such a lack of substance in what Trump has said. He has not really outlined a lot of policies. It's very broad stuff. And he always says, I'll get to that after I get elected. And, you know, how do you respond to that? So, I mean, I think she is treated like a typical politician. And so, and she, like I said, she has a lot of faults, a lot of flaws. But Trump doesn't have a record. You can't point, you know, we've pointed to his business record, which is spotty at best. We pointed to his, you know, different things that have happened in his life and stuff, but he doesn't have a public record that he's running on. And it's very hard. So, I mean, in some respects, I think it is true that she's held to a higher standard than he is. But I don't think the media can do anything more. I think everybody knows what Donald Trump is about. And, you know, the reality is there is a sizable number of Americans who are willing to take a chance with him.
Good question.
Yeah, I was wondering if the panel could comment on both candidates dealing with the huge global issue of radical Islam, and why Trump seems to be, you know, ostensibly racist, but Hillary can't seem to make any serious comment.
Larry, will we start with you?
Sure. You know, it's a complicated issue, obviously, and it's, you know, obviously Trump, you know, with his attacks and with what Kevin was alluding to, you know, proposing a ban on Muslims entering the country, that's quite a retrograde step, and obviously one that I think horrifies a lot of right-thinking people. At the same time, there is a palpable fear in the United States of terrorists. Since 9/11, it's still very terrorist there, and something that, you know, as somebody who lives outside the U.S., it's tough to kind of get to grips with at times. How you do it, how you come back on that, it's a difficult issue, but I think that Hillary needs to, I suppose, be forthright in defending the principles that the country was based on, one of which is the free practice of religion, and I think distinguishing between, as you put it, radical Islam versus mainstream Islam, which millions of Americans practice.
Go ahead, after that. Okay. Question here in the middle.
Yeah, so
you want to add any comments?
Hillary very recently described a section of Trump's supporter as a basket of deplorables. A basket of deplorables. Do you think, given the context of what we talked about today, that she needs to take the gloves off and go after Trump a bit more? And will that help her, or will Trump turn it to his advantage?
Well, tell me that, and if you were debate president, Larry first. Larry first, then Tad. And if you were debate president, you must be sitting in rooms now trying to figure out how does she play this debate against Trump. Go ahead, Larry.
Just quickly, that was a very foolish thing for her to say, in my opinion. It's one thing to go after the candidate, but to go after the people who are voting for Trump. And again, a lot of these people are Americans who are hurting you, who are desperate. To say that about them is a very, very big political misstep, in my view.
Yeah, I'm against attacking the voters too. I think that's always a bad idea. You know, I think Hillary Clinton and her campaign now need to work very hard to build up her favorables. Okay, I mean, they've spent $120 million on television advertising. They'll probably spend $200 or $300 million more between now and November. So far, it's been 100% negative. Now, Trump is a great target for negative ads. And trust me, I've made a lot of them in my day and will continue to do so, and they're very effective. But sometimes you need to offer reassurance to voters. And I think with Hillary, it's very important in a lot of places in different media markets around the country in swing states to go in and to reassure people that they can be comfortable with her, that she is okay, that as president, they'll be comfortable with her leading the nation. So I would argue for, and if I were doing the debate prep with her...
nice Hillary should turn up at the debate?
Well, no, listen, she first of all, she's got to be true to herself, okay? And being authentic, you know, as to who you are, you can't change that. But for her to be comfortable in her own skin, to talk about things that she cares deeply about, to be positive and not just relentlessly negative against Trump. Paid media, you can make a choice, okay? If you want to understand a campaign strategy, look at their ads and look at where they're playing their ads. Okay, that is the objective manifestation of strategic intent, where you buy advertising and what it says, because you control it totally and it's driven by the information that you have in research. But I think these debates are going to be more important than any debate since 1960 in the United States. You know, because the voters are so skeptical about the process and about the media, frankly, that when the candidates stand on the stage, the voters are going to say, aha, forget the ads, forget the coverage, I can figure this one out for myself. And by the way, when I worked here in 2007 in Ireland, you know, I saw the same thing. Countries do not want to give any democratically elected government a third term. In America right now, they're looking at a fifth Clinton-Obama term. Okay? I mean, that's effectively the way they see this thing. And they don't want to give it. That's the headwind she's against. So that debate for her is as important as the debate that Bertie Ahern had with Andy Kenny a week before the election. That one event that really changed the whole trajectory of the election and wound up with Fianna Fáil not only winning in 2007 against all odds, against every poll, but actually, believe it or not, winning 1/10 of 1% more of the first vote preferences than they did in a landslide in 2002. You know, that's how big this debate's going to be.
Alice.
I know Stacey touched upon what's next now for the Republican Party post this election, but I'd like to kind of get the panel's take on that. Particularly given that there are some quite high-profile members of the Republican Party who have lent their support to Donald Trump, but who you can see now are kind of starting to plan beyond this election cycle. Paul Ryan, for example, you can see him starting to put the language out there in campaigning for the House and the Senate. Don't write Hillary Clinton a blank check. Don't let her have control of the House and the Senate, which is interestingly enough the exact same phrase they used in '96 for they'd kind of given up on Bob Dole a few weeks out from the election and kind of started to say, don't let Bill Clinton, don't write him a blank check, don't let him have control of the House. So I'm wondering, based on that, maybe what the panel think about where next for the Republican Party.
Kevin, where the Republican Party, Trump wins, Trump loses.
Well, if Trump wins, I think one of the interesting things, all these sort of mainstream, very senior, respected Republican strategists and or advisors, are they going to sit it out? Are they going to say, I want nothing to do with this fellow? Or do they say, I'm going to save the country and go to work for Donald Trump, if that's the way they can portray it? I think if Trump loses, I mean, you know, the Republican Party, there's been a fight for the Republican Party's soul going on really since Reagan left. And it's a fight that's accelerated this year dramatically. And mainstream Republicans are still trying to get their head around how Donald Trump has pulled this off. And I think that's going to continue no matter whether he wins or loses. I think that the Republicans are still in a very big identity crisis. And obviously, if he wins, I think a lot of people will probably check their so-called principles at the doors and be able to say, well, I'm doing this for the country, not necessarily for Donald Trump. But there's an awful lot of talent that has worked, particularly in foreign policy, that wants nothing to do with this guy. So it'll be curious to see what happens if he wins.
Yeah, election years are, I suppose, time for voters to be able to reflect as well. And in that context, President Obama's approval ratings have gone way up. Do you think his legacy will be well remembered? Do you think perhaps his decency will be missed in contrast to the current spate of candidates? And is there a chance even that he may be remembered as a great president in times to come?
He'd be re-elected if he was on the ballot.
I think the interesting thing for me is the paradox in the polling right now. Because you have a very large percentage of Americans who say America is on the wrong track. On the other hand, the president has very high approval ratings, and the recent economic news is actually quite favorable. And so the paradox between that, I think, is quite interesting. And I think that the election is actually probably going to be the best barometer of where it is. There was a comment made earlier about whether or not what we were seeing with Trump represented some coarsening of American culture. On the flip side, the United States has twice elected an African-American president who, whether you agree with his policies or not, I think most people would say is somebody of eminent decency and has really administered a relatively scandal-free, very ethical administration. And so the same country that elected that president twice is now going to the ballot box in November. And it will be Dickensian almost in the tale of two elections, depending on how it goes. On the one hand, one result could be Trump. But the other tale of the city is that you could follow twice electing the first African-American president with electing the first woman president. And you could turn around and say, what a remarkable place that must be to have done that.
I think President Obama will be remembered as a great president. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month when he was inaugurated. You know, we were involved in 2 wars. There were 100,000 troops, American troops in Iraq, okay? You know, the president has, you know, by virtue of his leadership, I think, you know, while there's still a serious economic problems, and Bernie Sanders certainly spoke to us in the campaign in the United States, we've had 65 months of continuous private sector economic growth in the United States. There are 13 million jobs that were created in that period of time. More Americans have health insurance now. They've taken the number of uninsured under 10% for the first time in history. You know, the president's, the actions that he's taken on climate change have been bold, and he's done it without any help from the Congress. Indeed, all of the action he took on that front was in resistance to the will of the Congress. You know, and I think he set an exemplar in terms of the way he and his family have lived their lives and represented our nation as the head of state. So yes, I think he will be remembered as a great president. However, history is written by the winners. And if Trump becomes the president, okay, then, you know, his legacy will be clouded by that fact, I think. So hopefully Hillary will be, and I think history will then come to recognize the incredible performance he had as president.
Larry could be a little bit.
Very quick point. I just think one thing we haven't talked about much and hasn't been talked about in the United States much is African American turnout. President Obama can play a very big role on that front, and it's vital for Hillary to be reelected if he's going to have a legacy.
Question here, and I'll take the next one there then.
Yeah, hi. I think for many Americans that they feel that the two-party system has not served them well, and that I think that many of them actually believe that they become indistinguishable in terms of parties because they're basically both bought out. And this is one of the things that really have touched a nerve with a lot of people, a lot of Bernie supporters, is that now, you know, things are being basically run not by people, they're being bought out by money, basically.
I think the next question with that. Go ahead, yeah.
So I think one of the things is, like, even in terms of like the media and stuff, the distrust of the media, many voters view that as this is the part of the oligarchy, that it's basically 6 media corporations out there, and they're not reporting the news. They're actually trying to drive and make the news. They're not actually reporting the news properly. And one thing that if you talk to really strong Bernie Sanders supporters, they are not, many of them are not getting on board with Clinton because they do not believe that Bernie, you know, lost the election fairly. And there was a major study that was actually done, I think it was by Stanford, that basically said that, you know, Bernie won the election, is what they were saying, because of all the vote rigging that was going on. And this is not being covered by the media at all. It's being covered in some places, and this isn't even just like a small organization that came out with this. This is actually a major organization that came out with it, a very legitimate one. And I think anyone who's been looking at voter fraud for a long period of time, and it's like the United States doesn't even want to talk about it. But the thing is that it has been going on for a long time.
We have the question.
Thank you.
We get the next one here. Tal, what he's doing that, you're well positioned. Do you think, is it a myth that the Bernie voters won't turn out for Hillary?
Well, this is what the polling says. About 85% of them have already decided that they're going to support Hillary. There's about 15% that aren't. Are they going to vote for Trump? I think not. I think they're going to vote for Jill Stein, or I think they're going to vote for Gary Johnson, or they're going to go and vote for others, and they're not going to vote for anybody. So, you know, will many of the people that he registered turn out to vote? They may decide to stay home. So you know, that's where it is right now, at least in terms of the polling. I think they find Trump reprehensible. He stands for everything, against everything that Bernie stood for, fundamentally, with the exception of 1 or 2 issues. So I think they're going to, in the end, most of them, that's what all the polling says, wind up, you know, with her. And listen, I think Bernie looked at this decision the way Al Gore looked at the Supreme Court case in 2000. Okay, I mean, Al Gore stood up and basically said, I'm walking away from the presidency after the Supreme Court returned its opinion. And I think he did it because he had great respect for the rule of law in the United States and made that decision to try to keep the United States and rule of law in place. And frankly, as someone who worked for him, I'm very proud of the decision he made, even though the consequences of it were that George Bush came in and all the things that came along with it were devastating for America and the world.
Last question.
Thank you. A thought struck me during the middle of Colin's seminar that the society moving towards social media, etc., and if the debate is going poorly, a candidate could literally tweet middle live debate, and that becomes a story, and that could possibly how Trump could cover it if the debates are going poorly for him. And I could just ask each of the panelists to look into the magic ball and predict how the TV debates could go or what we can expect from them.
Okay, we've had a bit of take of it, but the capacity social media and Twitter gives to the candidates and their campaigns to interrupt the news cycle and put what they call a dead cat on the tail or distraction technique.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the case. I mean, I would find it very hard to watch a debate on TV without my Twitter feed open. But the reality is that while the campaigns can, as you say, throw a dead cat in the middle of my Twitter timeline, the journalists are also commenting live during those proceedings as well. In fact, some of the best tweets I've seen have been the live tweeting by journalists during debates where they are putting the corrective into what the candidates are saying. There's also a very high snark coefficient that is employed by journalists as they banter back and forth with each other, stuff that may not make it into their main pieces, but is certainly prevalent during the course of the debate. The reality is that you can always, there was a philosopher who said that a great truth is a truth whose opposite is also a great truth. And the great truth of the internet, and social media in particular, is that falsehoods can spread very quickly. But the opposite is also a great truth, which is that the corrective can also spread very quickly as well. And so you can also remedy something that's problematic instantaneously almost.
As well as being a nice historic cinema, this venue doubles as a full-scale digital cinema. So I think what Tomas should do is arrange a pajama party on the night of the 26th of September. I think it's 2 o'clock our time. Put out the popcorn, I suspect the house is full of It'd be a great idea. Folks, I told you this would be the most interesting session, and it has been. I want to thank Tad, Larry, Colin, and Kevin. Please give them a big round. Framing the program, we gave this a bit of a thought. It is the last session, which begins at 8 o'clock with a special screening of the Oscar award-winning movie Spotlight. The Boston Globe investigation into clerical abuse in the Boston Diocese is an extraordinary story. Spotlight is an extraordinary film.